And yeah, thank you for recording it. Yeah. Yeah, so today we are joined by Gary Swart. Currently, he is a partner at Polaris Capital. He serves on the board of several technology and healthcare companies. And he's had decades of operating experience and investing experience. Most notably, he was the CEO of oDesk, which is now Upwork, one of the largest freelancing platforms in the world. And he sort of guided that company through industry leadership and eventually led them through the merger with Elance. And ever since, he has also been serving as a sort of leading voice for the future of work in the online work industry. He's also served on other places, such as being the chief revenue officer of IntelliBank, and was also a senior manager at Rational Software, which was eventually acquired by IBM, where Gary then served as a business executive. So he's had a broad range of experience operating and investing. And not only that, but he's also a thought leader on marketplaces and also the rise of the freelance economy. And he appears frequently in publications on the air and as a mentor at a number of accelerators. So Gary, we are super happy to have you here today. And with that, I sort of hand it over to you to let you talk about your own experiences.
Thanks, Walden. Man, that introduction makes it sound like I actually did something. I might need to get that intro from you. That's a good one. I don't think I'm as crisp as that. So anyway, it's my pleasure to be here. I don't know if anybody on the call knows this, but I was supposed to be here yesterday. And so if I let any of you down, thank you very much for the flexibility to switch to today. What I thought I would do is just chat a little bit more about my background, maybe just a little bit about my career. And I will pause there and it'll open it up to questions because I would much rather this be interactive and have value for you. This is all about you. This has nothing to do with me. So I want to make sure that the time we spend together right now has the most value. So maybe I'll just spend a quick few minutes here on a little bit more detail about my career path and we'll go from there. So out of college, I went to the University of Maryland down in College Park, Maryland, about 100 years ago. I majored in business. And when I graduated, I ended up back in New Jersey, where I grew up in manufacturing. And that was a bad move. Manufacturing was an industry that was going like this and getting more competitive with tighter margins and a lot of it moving offshore. And technology was an industry that was going like this. It was up and to the right. And so I decided, with the help of my wife at the time, to move to the West Coast and get into technology. And that was a great move. I ended up at a little company called Pure Software. And Pure was a developer diagnostic tool company. So basically selling software development tools to developers to make them better developers. So write code better, cheaper, faster, essentially. And I joined on the sales team. I was employee number, 25 or something, very early startup. And it was a phenomenal job. Somebody told me if you're going to go into sales, you might as well pick a product that sells itself. And Purify, our flagship product, was a puppy dog. If you put it in developers' hands, they didn't want to give it back, just like a puppy dog at the pet store. And so if they didn't want to give it back, they had to send you money to keep it. And once one developer had it, it was really easy to upsell to more seats because every developer at a company needed it. And the company was smart and we developed other products. So you could also now have a cross sell. So the way you make more money is you can sell more of the same, you can sell something else, more of something else, or you can increase your prices. And so we started selling more of the same and more of something else. And the company did very, very well, went public in the mid 90s, acquired a bunch of companies and ultimately got acquired by Rational Software. And so I went from employee number 25 to employee number 600, 700 at Rational. And ultimately Rational was acquired by IBM. So I went from employee number 700 to employee number 131,000. So I like to say jungle, dirt road, highway. I started in the jungle, we navigated onto the pavement and then all the way onto the super highway at IBM, where I stayed for 2 years at IBM. And it was a great idea to stay at IBM because I got to experience a very large mega highway company and everything that comes along with it. What I realized was it wasn't ideal for me. So I left and joined another startup called IntelliBank. And IntelliBank was it was a character building experience. A good friend of mine says experience is what you get when you don't get all the other things you want. And suffice it to say, I learned a ton at IntelliBank. So I left IBM. I would say I was running from something as opposed to something. I made the wrong choice at IntelliBank. But the reason why I left is because I wanted sort of more out of my career and more out of life. And so what I realize now is that, you should always go to work with great people and hopefully doing something that you love. And then in addition to that, what was important to me was impact, growth and development, financial reward, and balance. And at IBM, I didn't have enough impact. The company was too big. I couldn't get near the bridge of the ship, let alone steer the ship. Growth and development was fine, but jobs that I could have 5 years from now at IBM, I didn't want today. You know what I mean? So my career growth wasn't steep enough. I wanted to be in the fast-paced, high growth, lots of problems coming at you at a high rate of speed. The financial reward was good at IBM. They paid very, very well, but I didn't have a lot of stock options. So if the company was wildly successful, it wasn't going to be game-changing wealth. And then balance, the fourth thing. And balance, I just is sort of like a catch-all category for everything else that you want to do outside of work. And suffice it to say, I had too much balance at IBM. Nobody really cared. I say my primary metrics at IBM were 9 and 5. And even that, people didn't care. And I had $180 million of revenue responsibility at IBM, and it was nothing. Like, it didn't matter in the $12 billion software group number, right? It wasn't going to move the needle for the company. So arguably, I had too much balance. And I like to, I just said experience comes from not getting everything else you want. And Pure Software was started by a gentleman by the name of Reed Hastings. Does anybody recognize that name? Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. And so Reed is now the CEO of a little company called Netflix. And so when Rational acquired Pure, Reed and Mark Randolph, who was the head of marketing at Pure, went off to start Netflix. And Mark wrote a great book about it. I don't have a lot of books on my shelf, but you can see it back there. And it's called That'll Never Work. And it's an excellent book about starting Netflix. And I was actually offered employee number 4 by Mark and Reed. And actually, I just spent the weekend with Mark. And and I didn't think it was a good idea. And so that was a pretty big mistake in my career. And my criteria now for deciding what to do comes from the criteria that I just mentioned to you. Go to work with smart people, Reed and Mark are 2 of the smartest people I know, and do something that you love. Well, I love movies. Like, that was I made a bad choice because I didn't have my criteria aligned or prioritized properly: the impact, the growth and development, the financial reward, and the balance. And so I know that now from my mistakes. Hopefully I pass some of that wisdom on to you. IntelliBank was not successful. We were able to sell the assets. It was more of a fire sale than a great outcome. But in the process of trying to raise money for IntelliBank, I met a lot of investors, and one of those investors took a liking to me as opposed to our company. And by the time we had our 4th meeting, it was a breakfast. And I said, "Hey, are you going to invest in IntelliBank?" And he said, "No, we want to invest in you." And I was recruited to come run a little company called oDesk. And oDesk was a marketplace for talent. So it's now called Upwork. I'll tell you a little bit about the journey to get there. But oDesk was a marketplace for talent. Think of it as eBay or Amazon. The same reason you go to Amazon to find the right good online as opposed to on-site, get delivery of that good in a safe, trusted way, and then pay for that good all via the internet as opposed to having to get in your car and go to a store. You all are so young, you probably don't even remember that, but most commerce was done offline. Most commerce still is done offline, but in the early days of Amazon and eBay, very little was done online. And oDesk was the same. It was about find the right worker, get delivery of the work, and pay for the work online. And 15 years ago, this was a really novel concept, remote work. Like, imagine being able to bring the work to the worker as opposed to the worker to the work. And unfortunately, it took a pandemic for the world to realize that remote work is even possible. And this is what we were selling more than a dozen years ago, right? It was hire the best worker regardless of where they are in the world, and let the internet be the roads into that geography. So now you can hire the best workers, you can manage them as if they were in your same office, and securely and safely pay them around the world. And oDesk, now Upwork, takes the risk, right? So we would pay the worker whether or not we collected the money from the client. And we had software that could guarantee that an hour billed was actually an hour worked, right? That we gave to clients. The business was wildly successful. We grew double-digit monthly growth for 2 or 3 years, and if you compound, from 0 up to about 100 million in revenue, we had millions of workers all over the world. We had hundreds of thousands of clients. We decided to merge with the number 2 player in the space, a company called Elance. And the reason we did that is there's a lot of reasons. I'm going to use an overused word called synergies. We had more international workers and clients. They had more US workers. We had more enterprise clients. They had enterprise technology. We had the best hourly work system. So hire somebody by the hour, manage and pay them on the basis of time. Elance had a much better fixed price method, like buy a good based on a fixed price with an escrow system and milestone payments and the like. We built an international payment platform. They had an escrow license. So we put 1 and 1 together and got 3 on day one. From a valuation standpoint, it was accretive on day one. And again, from a synergy perspective, it was highly accretive. There was only 12% overlap of clients. I don't know if you have access to HBS case studies, but there's 2 case studies on oDesk. One on oDesk and our innovative business model, where I would come to HBS and play the protagonist twice a year. I love that. And then the second was an oDesk Elance merger case study, and on why and how we put the companies together. Both, in my humble opinion, are fascinating and great learning opportunities. So if you have a chance to look at those, you definitely should. And then, so we created a new company called Upwork by putting the 2 together. Oh, one other reason on merging marketplaces, if you had looked at, there was a lot of prior art here. Grubhub and Seamless, Zillow and Trulia, HomeAway and VRBO, lots of marketplaces had come together before we did. And I spoke to all of those CEOs and boards, a lot of their investors to figure out whether or not it makes sense. And just in business efficiency alone, 1 CMO, 1 marketing budget, 1 general counsel, 1 CEO, 1 CFO, there's tremendous savings in putting the companies together. So that was another justification. From there, I orchestrated the merger between oDesk and Elance, and then decided that, remember earlier I talked about jungle, dirt road, highway? We were now on the highway again. And I realized that I wasn't going to be checking all my boxes. If I look at let's say generously that I knew 50% of what being a CEO was, and I had 50% to learn. The problem was I already knew 50% of the job, and I didn't feel like doing a lot of that 50% of the job. It would have been great if I could just focus on the part I didn't know, but unfortunately it comes with everything else. And after running the company for almost 9 years, I was ready for a change, and I wasn't going to sign up for 5 to 6 more years. And you can't take a company public and then say you want to leave. So I would have loved to stay for 1 to 2 years to get it public, but I knew it was going to take at least that amount of time to get to an IPO. And then you have to stay for another couple of years. So it was going to be signing up for another 5 years. And so I decided to move into, I started looking at other jobs, and most of the CEO jobs I was being offered, it was back to the same calculus that I already knew 50% of the job. Yes, it would be a different domain, but the mechanics of the job are the same. And so I decided to move into a venture capital role. And let's look at my previous criteria. If anybody's taking notes, go to work with great people. I love the people at Polaris. I spoke to a lot of firms, but I had some history with some of the Polaris partners. I also loved the fact that they were focused on healthcare and technology, and oDesk was an incredibly impactful company. And unless I went to work for the March of Dimes or ALS Foundation or some of these companies, it's going to be hard to pick a job or a firm that could have a big impact. And so the thing that was appealing about Polaris was the ability to do well by doing good, right? We have the patent on CRISPR, gene editing technology. And that to me was really exciting. Like if you can have a career where you're actually saving lives, that could be interesting. So it's go to work with great people, do something I enjoy. I had already been mentoring and advising lots of different companies. You can look at my LinkedIn profile, but companies like Thumbtack and of course, now I'm drawing a blank, but like 20 different companies, I'd been an early investor and advisor, and I really enjoyed that work. So sort of like the actor who now becomes a director, I was the operator who is now becoming a coach. And I decided I wanted to ride in a car, not drive a car. And so and then of course, impact, growth and development. I only knew 10% of the venture capital job. I had 90% to learn. Financial reward, you're putting multiple chips on the table out of your stack of chips, as opposed to putting all of your chips on one company. And not only are they your chips, but they're all of your partners' investments as well. So it's just a more leveraged strategy. And the more funds you raise, the more tables you can play. So since I joined Polaris 5 years ago, we're now on our third fund since I've been there, Fund 9. So you're playing 3 tables with your stack of chips plus your partner's chips. So it was a more leveraged potential financial reward. And then of course the balance. I'm not going to lie to you, it's not a big secret, but the balance of life is significantly better in this job than the CEO job. And so applying my own criteria is where we are today. So Polaris investing at a Fund 9, we manage about $4.5 billion. We're located in Boston, New York, San Francisco. We focus now in Fund 9 primarily on healthcare and technology, and we love the intersection of the two, healthcare and tech. We think it's a massive market opportunity with lots of tailwinds, and we think we're uniquely positioned to invest there with partners in New York, Amy Schulman, who ran consumer products at Pfizer. My partner Darren ran Corp Dev at Eli Lilly. My partner Isaac is a physician by training who's been an investor and has run companies. And my partner Dave and I, operators, tech folks who have run companies. Dave was the COO of Lotus. And so we think we have a really unique set of prior experiences that differentiate us from other firms out there, in addition to having a $450 million fund to invest. So that's where we are today. I'm happy to talk about any of this. And so what I thought I would do is pause here for a second, catch my breath and say, what should we talk about? Again, with the objective of delivering the most value for you in the next half an hour.
Question. I believe, so Jack has his hand raised. So Jack, you can go ahead and ask your question. And everyone else, you don't have to raise your hands for this. You can feel free to just jump in.
Yeah, and if when you ask your question, tell me where you are. Just out of curiosity, I like hearing where people are sheltering in place these days.
Yeah, I'm Jack. I'm a junior at Harvard. I'm in LA right now. I'll be here for the semester. I was curious because you said you started off your career in manufacturing and you got your degree in business. And then you quickly pivoted into more technology. How were you able to kind of see those trends early on beyond just being, keeping your eyes out for other opportunities? And, how were you able to make that shift, especially because you made so many shifts later on in your career too?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. It's funny. It's almost like I've had 10-year chunks. You know what I mean? Like I've done this, then I've done this, then I've done this. And I would say that I wasn't the most strategic. It's not like I said, hey, manufacturing is going down and what's up and to the right. And my career has been more serendipitous. And so I was in manufacturing. I actually liked it. I was living in New Jersey. I had great balance of life. I was making more money than any of my friends because I was self-employed. And I loved being self-employed and entrepreneurial. But what was happening was the market was getting smaller. So I was sort of like a middleman. I would get a job, somebody would give me a job, And then I would find somebody else to do that job, and I would mark it up, making money in the middle. Not too dissimilar from oDesk, quite frankly. And what I noticed was jobs that I was getting from clients, I was putting out for bid, and a lot of companies I was giving them to were saying, oh, we already got this job. So my market was actually shrinking, and it was getting more competitive. Jobs that I used to get $3 or $4 or $5 a part for were now getting bid down to $4, $3, $2 a part for. And so per part. And so that was one sign. And then I remember I picked up a Time magazine, and they were talking about this company in Silicon Valley, and they were talking about Oracle. And I had a friend from college who had gone to work for Oracle, and she was doing insanely well, living in San Francisco, making a fortune, loved her job. And I remember I came out to San Francisco to visit, and I said, you know what? I need to get into technology. So it was more serendipitous. It wasn't like, it was like one industry was going down and the other was going up. And I said, gee, I want to get on a fast moving train, not a slow moving train. And that was the impetus to do it.
That's really cool. Thanks.
Other questions?
Question here. I'm curious to hear about what it looks like to be a CEO of a pretty large tech company. What does a CEO really do?
Great question, Roger. Tell me where you are.
Oh, I'm in Boston.
Oh, good for you. Good. I miss it. I haven't been in 7 months. Our office is in the seaport, and I miss the food, the people, the scenery. So what's it like being a CEO? It's freaking hard. So you've heard the saying that it's lonely at the top. It truly is lonely at the top. And, I've been in other executive positions, and there's always somebody else that you can defer to. You know what I mean? There's always somebody above you. And in the CEO job, there is not. The buck stops with you. And you're accountable to your board, who is essentially your boss. Their single job is to hire and fire you. The buck stops with you with your clients. And in oDesk's case, we had two sets of clients. We had buyers, people who wanted work done, and we had freelancers, people who did work. And often those constituents are not aligned. What you do for one, you could take from the other. And so you're answering to your customers, right? And then you have all of your employees who you're responsible for and to, right? You're responsible for leading them and for the success of them. And it depends on how much you internalize it, but I took it very personally that I was responsible for their successes and failures, and also for their significant others. You stand up at the holiday party and give a speech, and all of these eyes are on you, all of their significant others, husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends, and you feel responsible for all of them, because they go home and complain about work or rave about work, and what they say to their other, that person is now judging you as well. And then you're also responsible to your investors. And so there's a tremendous amount of pressure in that job. There was for me anyway, because I felt responsible to all of those constituents, and many of them are competing, right? So in the job, what are you doing? Well, first and foremost, you're calling the strategy. Where are we going? Where is this company going? And then next most important is, how is it going to get there? Now, you're not responsible for coming up with all of that, right? If you have a great team around you, they could be responsible for coming up with it, but you're responsible for communicating it, for crystallizing it, for declaring what it is, because oftentimes in companies, there's not a clear strategy. And good leadership is saying, where are we going and how are we going to get there? And in every piece of communication to the company, I would say, this is where we're going and this is how we're going to get there. Now, the next thing you're doing is figuring out who's responsible for what. Oh, and by the way, where are we going and how are we going to get there? That's a huge thing. That's not just like, hey, this week we're going to figure that out and then we're going to communicate it. That could take months to crystallize that. Now you have to figure out who's responsible for what. So if we know that we're going from Boston to Baltimore, now we have to, and we know how we're going to get there, right? We map out our route. Now we're going to have to figure out who's responsible for what, who is in what seat, who's driving, who's responsible for food, music, maps, safety. You can think about all the different functions. That all has to be cleanly articulated and documented, because in the absence of that, people don't know what they're doing. And they know what they're doing, they don't know what others are doing. And then the next thing you're doing is figuring out how to measure the success of each of those responsibilities. You know how to measure the success of the company, whether it be top line, bottom line, growth rates, CAC, LTV, whatever your key metrics are, but each individual person needs to know how they're measured. And so just setting up all of that and then getting that bus or that rocket ship pointed in the right direction. And then it's up to you to lead, right? It's to make sure that you're getting best and highest use out of your culture based on these things. Now, that's a very general view of what you do as a CEO or as a leader. I mean, you're hiring, you're firing, you're making sure everybody's in the right seat. You're pushing, you're pulling, you're doing all of these things. And the better job you do at that, the easier it is for you to lead. So I mentioned my good friend Reed Hastings, and Reed, I saw him at a Christmas party, pre-COVID holiday party. And what I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, it's going great. And I said, well, how do obviously I can look at your stock price and see that it's going great, but how do you measure your success, Reed? What's important to you these days? And he said his number one metric was time interval between making a key decision. And so he knows he's doing a good job if there's a long interval between somebody coming to him and saying, we need you to decide on something. And he told me it had been 2 months since his last key decision. That means he's doing a phenomenal job, because he's set up a team and a culture and an environment where his team can execute, and he trusts them to make the right decisions. Right? So it's a great example of leverage, right? His job is to come in and read the Wall Street Journal, not to actually make a ton of decisions, where most people would think it's the opposite. If I'm not making all the decisions, I'm doing a bad job. Great question. Thanks, Roger.
Sounds like a lot of responsibility, but thanks for the clarity on that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Gary, so first of all, thanks so much for what you've done with Upwork. Jordan, who's on this call as well, are like massive Upwork users.
Hey, let's just pause right there and let me say thank you to you. I love that. I never get tired of hearing
I know you do. That 20%? Not messing. But no, it's been our primary metric's been our job success score. So far doing well. But it's a really cool platform. And I guess I was wondering, like, how do you see, I just thought I'd share that as proof that I actually am a fan. But how do you see sort of Upwork getting into the educational space? Because like for me personally, it was what caused me to drop out of school. But I can foresee a potential of Upwork like really expanding into that realm.
Yeah. What's interesting is, so I mentioned the 2 case studies. One of the case studies is at HBS is a strategy case study. And there's 3 dimensions to the story. And if you think about 3 axes, so you have the vertical axis is client size. And the horizontal axis is category. And then there's a vertical Z axis down and to the left, that's location. And you can think of location on 2 dimensions. One is the location of the client and the other is the location of the worker. And if you go back to 2006, this was a slide in our fundraising deck: size of client, type of work, and location. And in the center of those 3 axes was an arrow that said oDesk. We're focused here. Small businesses, right? So from extra small to extra large. Work type, mostly technical workers. Location, onshore client, offshore worker. Okay, so we were focused on that. But what we said was ultimately we want to own the whole thing. It's going to be all work types, right? So we're starting with coding, but if it's coding, why not QA, documentation, tech writing, writing, translation, marketing, support, theoretical physicist, bioinformatics expert, lawyer, accountant, right? Further out the work access. Not dissimilar from eBay, Beanie Baby, Pez dispenser, collectible, Rolex car. Amazon, book, big screen TV, island. You know, I mean, you could buy a lot of stuff on Amazon that you couldn't 20 years ago. And so we were going to expand out the category access up into bigger clients and more globally. And that's what Upwork has done, right?
And do you do that like relatively proportionately, or?
No, not at all. And we didn't, when I was running oDesk, we had a half a person focused on international. It was a woman, Allie Russell, who lived in London, and half of her job was marketing and half of it was international expansion from London. When we merged with Elance, they had 28 people focused internationally. They had a team of 28 people. And I would argue that today, I don't even think Upwork has 28 people focused internationally. And, Elance had category managers, we did not. And so I think it's based on supply and demand. You can look at what's happening in the marketplace. There's demand for more jobs where you don't have enough supply, and their education plays a clear role. I'll give you an example. iOS developers, Apple developers, mobile developers was a huge growth category. We had a ton of jobs and our liquidity there was low. So it was the rare instance of where we needed more iOS programmers. The problem was we couldn't find them. Like we were trying to find them and trying to get their attention. So Upwork, from a supply and demand standpoint, we had to market for clients, not for workers. If we had jobs, we could get all the workers we wanted. So, but this was an instance where we had thousands of iOS jobs and not enough workers. So what we did was we went to Java programmers. And I remember in Bangladesh, this was a great example. We had a lot of Java programmers, more Java programmers than we had jobs for. And we said to those Java programmers, how would you like to learn iOS? And if you learn iOS, you can go from $20 an hour to $32 an hour overnight, because iOS programmers were more in demand, which meant rates per hour were higher. And we had a story of a guy who got his first job on oDesk at like $8 an hour in Bangladesh. And 3 months later, he was making $40 an hour as an iOS programmer because he went and learned iOS programming. And so it's a great example of what I call real-time vocation, right? You think of vocational or tech school, what role could Upwork play in that? Well, you're looking at the trends. You know what is in demand from clients. Could you then point that preemptively to workers and say, go learn these skills, go, and here's how much you can make. Why? Because they're the largest market of temporary workers in the world. So that real-time, I think education plays a massive part. And when you get to real-time vocation, regardless of geography, that's GDP, right? Like here's somebody in Bangladesh making 8 and then 3 months later making 5 times that. There's no job in the world where you're going to go that steep of a trajectory of wage inflation, right? So I think education plays a massive role from a real-time vocation standpoint.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had a similar experience. It was awesome.
And we had a college student. I remember I called him. He was at, I forget what school, it might have been Vanderbilt. And he was making $60 an hour. And I remember I called him and he said, am I in trouble? And we're like, no, you're not in trouble. I said, I just want to know your story. And he said, well, I'm in this college and I'm a pretty good programmer and I make money from my dorm room. And he was $60 an hour. And I remember saying, like, talking to him and saying, like, so what's your real story? And then he got really confident, and his profile would say, I will code circles around, I'll code circles around anybody else on oDesk. And then his bio said something like helping you destroy your enemy. And then underneath it said, may or may not actually destroy your enemy. You know what I mean? Like, he had a really creative profile. And people are he was fully booked. Like he was working 2,000 hours a year in addition to going to school, making $62 an hour. So it was just a great story. You know, we used him for press all the time in the early days.
That's super cool. But for the record, 87.5. So just saying.
What's that?
Hourly.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Started at 4.
Awesome. God, I love to hear that. That is the best. The best. Awesome. What else can I answer? We can talk about anything. We can talk about strategy. We can talk about investing, marketplaces. How do I add value for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to ask a quick question. Thanks again for your time, Gary. I really appreciate it. This is an awesome chat. I am also a big fan of Upwork, and hopefully this isn't a little too focused or we're getting too carried away on Upwork. But so I'm focused on financial inclusion in emerging markets. So right now we're working in Myanmar. And one of the things I like about Upwork is it's like a great way for people to obviously get started, just as you were saying, with employment. And kind of what we're doing is facilitating, like we're improving the lending process by utilizing like unconventional data to inform default risk so that small business owners or entrepreneurs can get loans. And one of the things that's been highly recommended is, now we've got this digital platform that allows for like transactions cross-border that we're putting in the hands of anybody, anywhere. Why don't we also provide the capability to earn an income through their phone? Because now we have a way to get the money to them and then they can transact digitally. I'm curious to hear like, what your thoughts are on like the application of Upwork and like these digital marketplaces and then also digital money potentially in emerging markets and supporting development more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was part of the vision in the first place, right? It was like, how do you bring economics into a region? Well, it requires infrastructure. Like it requires people on the ground and infrastructure. And what we realized is that the internet was the roads in to Myanmar. Like you don't actually need to be on the ground. You need to have access to the internet. And then those people are available to work for clients anywhere in the world. And so that was one of the key insights and one of the most exciting things about the platform in the early days. And I have so many examples of where this happened. I mentioned Bangladesh. We went from nothing in Bangladesh in 2008. And by 2009, it was the third highest producing region. More dollars were going to Bangladesh than just about anywhere else. It was right behind Eastern Europe and India on our platform. So from 0 to 3rd in a matter of years. And we had a graphic, one of these graphics that would display how quickly it grew and how it moved, kind of like the moving graphic. And so the key is how, right? Because you have to give access to the workers. They've got to be trained on some specific skill. And then they've got to be able to get a job. And so we had a lot of people that were using our platform to help facilitate it. There was a platform, Lila Jinnah, unfortunately she passed away, but she had a platform that I think their tagline was give work. Oh, Sama, S-A-M-A, Sama Source. And they were one of our early partners where they were going into Africa, training workers to do, basic tasks like cleaning up data. And they put together a platform that would make it really easy to get a worker to do, not super highly skilled work, but, I need a judgment, I need categorization, I need data cleansing. And Sama was organizing that work and then using Upwork to help facilitate it. Yeah. So they built on top of us, but that might be a good example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I just even getting any kind of initial cash flow. I mean, even if it's for something small, for a rudimentary task, like that's building up like some a digital history basically that lenders can utilize to evaluate risk. And so, I mean, then potentially get an investment to get more education or get more equipment or. Yeah, it's really cool. Thanks.
And there were a lot of companies I looked at over the years that were using this for that as well. So like boots on the ground to take pictures of indoor, take pictures of menus, take pictures of indoor, help Google to map inside versus outside. there was a company that was, they had a lot of CPG clients, and they would actually go to the grocery store and take a picture of the Budweiser shelf to make sure that it was set up properly. So as opposed to Coca-Cola or Budweiser having to send an employee, they would use the wisdom of the crowd to do it. And all you needed was a mobile phone. I think it was called Gigster or Gigwork or Gig Walker. You know, there were lots of these platforms in the early days where you could make money just by having a mobile phone. So you would go on and say, hey, I'm in Boston. Is there anything I can do right now to make money? And you would look and it would say, yeah, we have this job and it will pay you $3 per image that you go and take of these restaurants or of Kendall Square, whatever it is, right? And so you could make money with your mobile phone. And there may be, you know, opportunities like that. Like what could you do? Oh, there were mystery shoppers. There was a mystery shopper app built on top of Upwork where, you know, Fendi would say, we want to hire somebody to go into our store in Dubai, purchase a bag and document all the steps, and we'll pay them for that, right? And so it was, we had a lot of these different use cases built on top of Upwork.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
Cool. Adam, where are you? Did you tell me where you are?
No, I'm in Quincy right now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great. What else?
I got a second question here, but anyone who also has a question, please feel free.
All right, Roger, I'm going to give somebody 5 seconds and then we'll go back to you so we keep it rolling. All right, it's yours. Nobody's going to cut you off.
Okay, cool. So you advise a ton of companies, right? Could you sort of walk us through your advice for early stage companies who are looking to build an advisory board? You know, what things should we be looking out for? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, great question. My first piece of advice to entrepreneurs is don't take my advice. So what I mean by that is go get a lot of opinions, right? And talk to people that you know and trust. And one of the mistakes I made in early oDesk is I thought, oh, if I have a lot of advisors, this is going to be great because I'm going to have all these smart people around me who have done a ton, and that's going to help me because I can always call them. And it's also going to look good if I put a bunch of high-powered advisors in my slide deck. People are going to think that I'm somebody if I have these great advisors. And the problem with it was that it cost me a lot of money and I never really used them. So I'll give you one quick example. We had a guy who ran all fraud, trust, and safety at eBay. He had 3,000 people in his organization, and we had a lot of fraud and trust and safety issues. And so I went and got this guy to be an advisor for us. And I think the shares that I gave him as of today are probably worth $1.5 million. And I think I spent about 3 hours total with him. So $500,000 an hour is a pretty good consulting rate. And I'm pretty sure that he didn't deliver $1.5 million of value. And so what happens is things move so fast in a startup that I would say within 90 days, we were facing fraud that eBay had never seen. So he was good. The first hour was valuable. The second hour was a little less valuable. And the third hour, we were already past where his capability was. And so now what do you do? Go get another advisor who is more current at eBay? And so free is much better than paid. You would much rather sit down for an hour, buy somebody a lunch or a coffee. It costs you $50, right? Or a quick Zoom call. And where you want to see is if you're still getting value after the third, the fourth, the fifth meeting. You know what I mean? And so I always say the first one is free. Like you get some advice. And if you really like somebody and you want them to be an advisor, I recommend working through having a whole list of problems, not just one problem, but a whole list of problems that you're facing that you want to discuss, and see if you enjoy working with them. Are they valuable on problem solving? And is this somebody you want along for the long haul? The second thing I would recommend is, assuming you get to that spot, is you have a consulting agreement that gives both you and this advisor a 30-day out. So you say, look, we're going to have a consulting agreement for the next 2 years, and I'm going to give you X amount of equity vesting over, 1/24 per month over the next 2 years. And at any point, during our agreement, our relationship, I can end it or you can end it. So if they stop adding value, you could say, hey, Gary, thank you very much. You've been incredibly valuable to date. This is formal notification. I want to end our consulting arrangement, right? Or advisorship. And that gives you an out in case somebody stops adding value, or for whatever reason, you don't want them as an advisor anymore. And it could be, I don't know, maybe there's some bad PR around that person. And then let me just give you some other good guidance. There's personal characteristics, there's motivation, there's skill, and there's knowledge, right? Personal characteristics, who is the person? What personal characteristics do they have? And what personal characteristics are important to you? Are they smart? Are they hardworking? Do they have high integrity? Can you back channel them with other people saying, hey, is this person really strategic? Or are they really tactical? Or, what are the things about that person that you can't change? And then that's personal characteristics. Those things you can't change about a person. You have to get those right. The motivation is, why do they want to help you? What's in it for them? And then there's the skill and the knowledge. And most people make the mistake that I made, which was go for the skill and the knowledge. I went for the fraud, trust, and safety guy because he ran trust and safety at eBay, knowledge, domain expertise. Skill, was an attorney, knew the ropes. I didn't focus on the personal characteristics and motivation, right? And after we ended our consulting agreement with this particular individual, he went and signed up for the same deal with our competitor. That's a low integrity move. I should have nailed that before I focused on the skill and knowledge. So if you draw a triangle, at the top of the triangle, the personal characteristics and the motivation are more important for advisors than the skill and the knowledge. Right. And skill and knowledge may be table stakes. You're not going to hire a CFO that doesn't have a CPA, but they have to have a CPA and be high integrity and smart and creative and all of the things that are important to you. And they have to be great coaches. You don't want somebody who's going to be riding in the car with you and grabbing the wheel, right? It's distracting. You want somebody who's going to ride in the front seat and not grab the wheel, not ride in the back seat.
Right. That's all really, really great advice. Thanks so much.
Great. Sorry, whoever's asking cut out. Walden froze, which I think is a testament to the size of the internet pipes on Harvard's campus. Yes.
Maybe I'll jump in while he's. Oh, there you go, Walden. You're back now.
Go ahead, please.
So, Gary, I'm sure you see a ton of pitch decks in your current role. Curious to hear what the best and worst slide on a deck is, in your opinion.
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. But let me give you. Can I take that question and expand it and just make it a little bit broader? Yeah. Like, what I look for? So I say there's three things. There's people, there's PowerPoint, and there's Excel. All right. And so people, who are the people? What have you done before? Who are you? What makes you the expert at this? Or do you have let's say that you don't have a ton of experience, but you have a phenomenal founder story. So I just invested in a mental health company. It's two kids like your age, basically. They're barely out of UC Berkeley, and they have a mental health startup. And their story was that they were over in Nice, France, when that truck ran through the crowd and two of their friends were killed. And they came back to Cal and they wanted to go see somebody. They wanted to talk to somebody, and Cal offers you, one free session and then says, call your parents, or, sorry, we got people who want to jump off buildings. We can't help you. And so they decided to start a mental health company using technology, and they opened a clinic at Cal. The school referred all the students to them. And within 3 months, they were at capacity. They're up to 22 clinics. I don't know, they're doing about $1.5 million a month. They've got an on-premise and online service, 100% covered by insurance, and they're using technology to deliver better quality. They're 23 years old. So who are the people? They didn't have a huge track record, but they were phenomenal on the personal characteristics and motivation side. The lesson that we just talked about, They check those boxes. Did they have a ton of skill and knowledge? No, but I was so impressed with the personal characteristics and motivation, I invested. So who are the people? What's your story? Like, is that compelling? The PowerPoint is, that's your story. This is where you're telling me why the why you and why now, right? Like, what is so special about what you're doing? And is it a huge market? Is it a unique approach? Is it 10 times better than anything else that exists out there? And so I want to see and hear a great story. So it's not like, what's the best slide? It's, is there a story arc that's compelling, right? Is it crisp? That tells me that you're a concise communicator and that you know how to ruthlessly prioritize. I got a deck today, it was 43 slides. The slides were beautiful. They hired a graphic designer. It told a good story. That shows me this is a team that can't prioritize, right? Like, if you need 43 slides to tell me your story, that means you need every piece of functionality and feature in your product in order to accomplish something, right? It's not one click. It's, swipe and magic happens, which is what the world demands nowadays, right? And then the third thing is Excel. And the Excel portion of your deck or of your story is not, showing me this massive $12 billion market. And if you just get 2% of it, you're going to be $100 million. It's what's the evidence or the proof that people are willing to pay for this, right? So if I break down the story, and I'm sorry for the long answer here, I'm showing that I'm not crisp, but if you think about it, I like aspirin, not vitamins, right? Aspirins, you have to take. A vitamin is nice to take, but you don't have to take it. It's harder to sell a vitamin than it is an aspirin. And I want to see that lots of people have this migraine headache that you have the aspirin for. And I want to see that they're willing to pay to make this headache go away. And then I want to see that it's going to be easy for you to sell it. Like, if you think about it, migraine headache medicine, sure, you may have a better formula, but you're going to be on the shelf at Walgreens or CVS, and you're going to have to compete against Advil and Tylenol and all these big brands. That's going to cost you a lot of money. So what's your go-to-market approach? And so the more of that story you can tell, the more excited I get. And so if you think about, who are the people, what's the story, and then what's the proof, the Excel, the evidence that people are willing to pay for it. Maybe you don't have any clients, but you have a couple of people who said, hey, if you build this, I'm willing to pay for it. Or, you have some evidence, you've done your market research that there are some economics to be had here.
Super helpful. Thanks.
I hope so. Sorry it took so long to get that out.
No, good advice.
Yeah. If anyone else has any questions, go ahead. Hopefully my internet will be stable enough for me to sort of ask my question now.
So Walden just sent me a private message saying, is it okay to share my email? I would prefer not to, because it becomes cumbersome for questions. So maybe LinkedIn is better. If you just go to LinkedIn and say, hey, we were in the Harvard class, and that way at least I can filter. And a lot of what we talked about is I blog about on LinkedIn. So I talked about the hiring thing. I talk about the people, the PowerPoint, Excel. So if you go there, you can at least do a little bit of homework. I maybe answered the question. If not, let's connect there, and then we can decide whether or not it makes sense to kick it over to email.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I see Jack has a question. So you know what, Jack, you can go ahead and ask your question, so we're short on time.
And I'm happy, Walden, I'm happy to stay a couple extra minutes. So whatever you want.
Yeah, if you were to restart your career now, Gary, I guess for us as like Harvard college students about to enter the workforce, what kind of sectors would you be going into? Maybe not manufacturing.
Jack, I might go into manufacturing if I were really passionate about manufacturing. So, you guys have all seen these concentric circles where, it's the Venn diagram where they say, are you good at it? Do you like doing it? And will somebody pay me to do it? And does it make a difference in the world? Right? So is it impactful? Is this good work? Right? So are you good at it? Do you like, because you can be good at something, but not really enjoy doing it, right? Do you enjoy doing it? Will somebody pay me to do it? And is it good for the world? And if you figure out those, what's most important to you, you'll be able to sort of lean towards that, go look for a job that's going to check those boxes. And so, for example, let's just say that you love sports. You absolutely love sports. So you say, okay, well, where could I go to work? Well, I could work for ESPN or FanDuel or StubHub or, who are the sports bloggers guys that, DraftKings, I don't know, something around sports, the San Jose Sharks, I don't know, but you might gear your career search to that if that's your passion. And so that's what I would do differently. If I had followed that advice, my mistake of not going to Netflix was about $150 million mistake for me personally. And by the way, I love movies, right? So what I've learned is you might as well go do something that's going to get you out of bed in the morning that you love. So go to work for the smartest people regardless of the job, or go to work doing what you love. And then beyond that, we already talked about it, right? It's impact, growth and development, financial reward, and balance. So what I would do is I would list out the things that were important to me. I would get a Google spreadsheet out and I would say, okay, people, do I like doing it? Am I good at it? And then I would list my criteria: impact, growth and development, financial reward, and balance, and prioritize them based on what's most important to you. Bear in mind that balance is much more important to me now in life than it was 20 years ago. Probably the same for you. You probably want to prioritize growth and development over balance. But there may be elements of balance that are really important to you. You say, listen, before I have a family, before I'm tied down, I want to travel, I want to see the world. I want a job that's going to give me the flexibility or the opportunity to travel and see the world. You may not want to go into banking. You don't want to go to Goldman because you're not going to be able to travel. You might, after 2 years, they might station you in London or Hong Kong, but for now, you're going to be working 80 hours a week. So you have to make sure that that's going to check all your boxes. And my guidance to you would be learn as much as you can early in life. Like, only go to jobs where your growth curve is going to be really steep. And, I hope I didn't come across as dogging IBM. I actually really liked IBM. I just realized it wasn't a perfect fit for me, right? And so if it's not a perfect fit for you, go do something else, right? Pick a job where you're going to check as many of those boxes as possible, recognizing it's going to be hard to check all of them.
Thank you. All right. So my last question is that, so Upwork sort of started as a platform for businesses to find talent, but now it's always become like the Amazon for work, as you call it. So when early stage founders are just starting a business, should they be thinking about like these long-term, super ambitious goals, or should they be really focusing on more on the short-term, everyday steps? And if there's like a sort of balance that you have to hit between those, like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, Walden. All the questions have been great. So thank you so much to everybody. It's both. The answer is you have to do both. And the reason why is I'll see a lot of pitches where people say, we're gonna do this. And it seems really small, very niche. And what I love about that is that it's focused. You remember we talked about IntelliBank. Our mistake was that we tried to be all things to all people. We tried to be a platform out of the gates, and platforms are really hard. So what you want to do is you want to own a hill in an area where there are lots of mountains, you know what I mean? So you can go from one hill to the next hill to the next. So what I like to see is Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So if you say, look, in Act 1, we're just going to do this, right? And this in and of itself is a really interesting business. We're just going to do books online. And if we just did books, that's a really interesting business. We're going to put all these local bookstores out of business. We're going to offer a broader selection at a much better price, shipped right to your door within 24 hours. And we can stock many more titles because we have one warehouse in the middle of nowhere, as opposed to local real estate footprint everywhere. And if we just become the world's largest bookstore, that's a really interesting business. But wait, there's more. We're going to do more. From books, once we nail books, we're going to start adding other categories. And ultimately, we'd like to be the world's most customer-centric business, the world's largest e-commerce business. But we're going to start with books. right? And so Netflix, we're going to start with DVDs. And then one day we'd like to be the world's largest entertainment company, right? And so what you want to see is a big vision, but you want to see a methodical plan to get there. Because if it's too aggressive out of the gates, you say you're never going to get there. And if it's too small, you say that's too niche, right? And you can think about Airbnb. It started as sleeping on somebody's couch in San Francisco. And then it was San Francisco, New York, and Paris. Just 3 markets sleeping on someone's couch. And now it's the world's largest hospitality company. And Uber, it started as one person's private driver, 10 people's private driver, to everyone's private driver, right? And so you have to start small or else it seems defocused. And, but if it's too small, then it doesn't seem big enough. So it's got to be both. And I look for people who can tell a story between Act 1 and Act 2, and maybe even Act 3.
Awesome. That sounds great. And you know what? You have so much good advice for all of our founders today. So thank you so much for coming today. And as you saw, a lot of us are huge fans of you. So it was amazing that we could get to hear from you and hear about all the amazing stuff you've done. So this has really been an amazing experience hearing from you. And we really can't thank you enough for showing up today.
Oh my gosh, it was my pleasure. Honestly, I thoroughly enjoy doing this, and I'm happy to come back, Walden, if it makes sense. So thank you for the opportunity. And if you want to dig in further, we can connect on LinkedIn, and we'll go from there. Good luck finishing your career. One at Harvard. One last thing we didn't talk about, but you know, we talk about growth and development, and at the end of the day, you're just the sum of your experiences. I can chat with you today, and maybe I have some valuable things to say because of all the mistakes I've made in a long career. And so one of the things that I would encourage you not to squander is this opportunity that you've been presented with today, which is learning remotely. And don't squander it. These skills that you're getting today will be valuable in your work life, right? Like, how did you stand out remotely? How did you execute when the world shut down? What did you do differently? And this becomes an experience. You can say, oh, when I was in college, I had to do this, and here's what I did as a result. This becomes part of your wisdom gain. So you're on that journey, and not only do you have the on-premise for you upper class people, but you now also have the online experience, which becomes part of your journey. So don't squander it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I guess to cap it off, thank you all for coming today. And hopefully you guys are able to do what Gary was talking about not squandering this experience and really learning from all the mistakes that Gary has shared with us today.
Lots of them.
Right.
Of them.
Yeah.
All right, all. Stay healthy.
All right. Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Gary.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you so much.